When we decide to start learning something new, we usually do one of two things. Either we go look to somebody who has done it before successfully and we ask them how to do it, and or we like come on YouTube and look it up, which is basically the same difference, except here on YouTube you don't have to know the person. You can just like type it into this little search bar and you're good. And for things like changing a tire or playing the guitar, that makes sense. Unfortunately, the problem is that people do this with language learning, and what people don't realize is it's not the same thing. When you are learning to build a pool or like learning origami, these are like very simple, like they're like teaching you how to move your fingers and the techniques and what to look for. But the thing with language learning is that it's not just like an objective skill. And so by that I mean that, like, okay, so like for origami, for example, or like any type of art form, you already have control of your fingers, okay? Assuming you have control of your fingers and your limbs and you can move them, you're perfectly able to move them. You just have to move them in certain ways, with certain flows in certain directions, like maybe certain fingers, whatever. But with language learning, we gotta take a step back, because it's not like you already know the sounds. It's not like you already know the words. You just kind of like gotta take them and like put them together in a different way. That's not what language learning is. Language learning is taking a step back and teaching your brain how to restructure like everything. So it's not like thinking, okay, here are the vowels, here's what the vowels sound like, here's how to put the vowels together in like different ways, and then bada bing, bada boom, you can speak a language fluently. It's not like that. First of all, the sounds are different. And like communication is such like a vital part of being a human. And to just kind of assume we can just ignore it, I mean, no wonder we fail at learning languages, because we're ignoring such a giant part of the experience of learning a language. The way that I'm talking to you right now, I have thoughts, I can express them, I can find different words to put together, I can give you a gist of the concept that I'm trying to communicate to you. But to do it in a different language requires so much more than just like taking the vocabulary that I know in English and transforming it into like, I don't know, French or like Icelandic or something. It's not just like translating the words, putting the words together, and bam, you're done. You're retraining the brain that you've been developing in a certain way since you like walked out of the womb. It's completely different, and it's like it's pretty earth-shattering, honestly, for those of us who were raised speaking one language. Those of us who were raised as monolinguals, is a completely different story. You're not just learning a new skill, you're learning how to function differently as an adult. I'm gonna say that again. Language learning is not just learning a new skill, it's also learning how to function as a new adult. I mean, people say that when you speak different languages, that your personality changes in different languages. It's because you're like becoming a new type of person. That's a big deal. That's not something that you can just figure out in a month. That is a big deal. Like if you've been one person who speaks English for 20 years and then you want to become someone who speaks English and also Spanish, you cannot expect that personality from 20 years of life in the language to just kind of like turn into a Spanish one. It's a completely different thing. Language learning it's so personal. The personal experiences that create who you are now, you have to do that again in another language. And I don't say that to scare you. I don't say that to turn you against language learning. Obviously, that's not why I'm here. I just want to express to you why it's not as simple as picking an app and like listening to somebody else. So what does this have to do with following polyglots and learning to learn a language like a polyglot does? When we follow polyglots and we do it kind of in blind faith and trusting that, they've learned multiple languages so they can teach me how to learn multiple languages. Like you would, somebody who learned how to play the guitar I can follow them and they can teach me how to play the guitar. This makes sense on the surface level, and unless you have the experience that I do and other language learners, like successful language learners do, it's not immediately clear why that's a flawed system. So besides the fact that language learning is personal and like it kind of like confronts a part of your identity that maybe you haven't thought about before, I want to show you a different way to approach language learning so that you don't get sucked into following all these different strategies and like when they don't work, assuming it's something that's wrong with you. I want to take like several steps back and I'll use examples of well-known polyglots just so that you understand how you're getting messed up and what you can do instead to fix it. So the first thing to understand, the first thing to really get clear on is not necessarily this person found a lot of success learning languages and so their strategy works for them and like 100 million people or whatever their reviews claim. So therefore it should work. First, I want you to back up and I want you to think about what you want to do with the language, how you want to use the language. And this one little like switch in your brain is going to make a world of difference. So for example, let's talk about two different well-known polyglots. We have Olly Richards and we have Benny Lewis. If you're not familiar with those names, Olly Richards does, it used to be called I Will Teach You a Language, not story learning. And I have a review of his story learning method linked below. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can take a look at that. And Benny Lewis does Fluent in 3 months. If you ever heard the term Fluent in 3 months, that is Benny Lewis. So there are some really stark differences between these two people. So Olly Richards, his thing is to learn language through stories, right? Specifically, his focus is on reading stories, building up your reading comprehension. Yes, there's some listening in there because when you're working with tutors who are speaking the language, but there's no like actual attention given to that. His thing is to learn language through stories, which means you are building your reading comprehension, which means you are much more likely to be able to open up a book in your target language and understand what's going on than you are to be able to speak it. In fact, if you are just using story learning, you will not be able to speak the language. You'll be able to understand a lot of the written word. You might be able to understand the spoken word a little bit, but you're not going to be able to have conversations because that's not what Olly Richards is about. On the flip side, we have Benny Lewis, whose focus is like literally the exact opposite, and it is speaking as quickly as you can, getting comfortable, getting conversationally fluent as quickly as possible, throwing yourself into conversations, making as many mistakes as you possibly can until eventually you feel confident and you feel great and you can have conversations and it's awesome. See, these are two very different results, and at the most, one of them will be the result that you're looking for. One of them. If you're focused on speaking, then you're not focused on reading. They're just two completely different goals. So if you want to be conversational and you go down the story learning route and you try Olly Richards' method, you're going to be disappointed and you're not going to be able to be conversationally fluent because that's not what the goal is there. Now, most of the time people want to speak the language. So you say, okay, great, let's do Fluent in 3 months, let's do Benny Lewis. But there's a caveat here. The caveat that I personally had to learn the hard way because I definitely tried his methods and it sucked for me and it did not work for me. And this leads me to my second point, which is how do you like to learn things? Once you are clear on the result you're looking for, the strategy in which you're going to achieve the result, there are so many different strategies. There are literally, quite literally, unlimited strategies for any particular result. It's about finding the strategy that works for you. So when I tried Fluent in 3 months, it was basically like a very intensive 90-day, like, you try and commit as much time as you possibly can to the language. And at least when I did it, it didn't matter what you were doing, it didn't matter how you were practicing, it just, as long as you were doing something, it counted. Now for me, personally, that does not work. I cannot do like very strict rules like that. I also can't do like intensive language learning. I have to do something that is, I do when I want to, basically. As soon as I make it a rule that I have to learn a language every day, every other day, my brain is like, nope, that is not gonna happen. You're gonna do everything and you're gonna be disappointed in yourself and you're not gonna like that about yourself. So what happened when I tried to use the Fluent in 3 months method to learn Spanish? I watched a lot of a child's cartoon. That's it. I didn't speak. And that's why if you want to learn languages like a polyglots get successful because they learn how to learn languages for themselves and then they sell their own strategy that they made up to learn a language. And they say, oh, you know, tried and true method, yada, yada, yada. But the problem is everybody's different, and quite frankly, I am the only one who is able to direct you to the strategy that will actually benefit you because it works with your brain, it gives you the results that you're looking for. So if we're not going to just copy and paste a polyglot strategy to learn a language, if that's not working for us, what do we do instead? The thing that you do instead is you take action, get data, and adjust. So in reality, when you get started, it doesn't really matter how you start, just that you start and you're gentle with yourself and you don't have expectations for yourself, you have expectations for the strategy, the tool that you're using. Use that strategy for a while, see what works about it, see what doesn't work. If nothing works, if you hate it, then you don't have to force yourself to do it. And if you enjoy it, but there's something else wrong, you can take data on what is wrong with it and, look for something else. For example, if you tried Pimsleur, which is an audio program, it's literally just audio, and you hated it, I hate Pimsleur, just my personal opinion that has absolutely no bearing on whether or not you will like it and whether or not you will benefit from it. You figure out why you hate it. I figured out I hated it because it's too slow and it's too boring for me. And so literally I'll use it to keep my Pimsleur review updated, which doesn't need much because it's the same program that it was back in the 80s, 90s, whenever it started. But I don't have to use it. Just because it is a well-known program that many, many people like to use does not mean that I need to use it. There are so many other options. There are unlimited options, and there is no reason why you need to force yourself to learn a language in a way that you hate. Because our goal here is to enjoy language learning, because if we enjoy it, then we will do it. And if we do it, then we will learn a language, and huzzah, we will reach our goal of learning the language. So that is my spiel about how to learn languages like a polyglot, aka don't, because they only know what works for them. They don't know what works for you. They only know what works for them and what works for their successful users. The people who aren't successful, they just leave and, go somewhere else and, figure something else out and hope for the best, basically. Anyway, this is a really important topic that people aren't talking about, so I want to shed some light on why learning languages like a polyglot isn't going to work for you, and it's not your fault. So if you enjoyed this video and want more videos like this all about how to unlearn all the things that the language learning industry tells us, let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I post a new video all about how to learn languages every Wednesday. Bye.